Welcome to Crime Beat. I'm Anthony Robart. Tonight, Sarah Whitehead and Larry Arnold. 2 murders, 2 cases, years apart.
He had gone to visit some friends, had left a message on the answering machine saying, "I'm out for the night," and that was the last thing anybody heard of him.
Arnold's severely beaten body was found on Saturday in a Rosedale District park. The park is frequented by gay men for sexual encounters.
Because of the condition of the body, there was no DNA available to us whatsoever, like suspect DNA, suspect samples.
No one really knew what had happened.
Nope.
He was the victim of a murder.
Yeah, exactly.
The one case that kept me awake at night and drove me crazy, a violent homicide, and is it going to happen to somebody else in the future? That was a big concern for us.
After midnight on the 8th of August, we responded to what at that time was a missing person.
There was a trail behind the mall, a shortcut to the direction of their homes. I said, well, I'll go take a look.
Just at 6:55, Eric finds Sarah's Walkman.
And then I actually did see her.
It was determined by the pathologist that she had died from manual strangulation.
It was just the worst day of my life.
It was like every day having to go to work and looking for a needle in a haystack, and every day there was a new haystack.
Then finally one day you get a call.
We had received a call from Constable Chris Brown of the OPP.
Chris says, wow, this is a really violent sex offender.
Can a tip lead investigators to connect the cases?
I took one look at him, and it looked like pure evil had walked through the door.
Here now is Caryn Lieberman with part 2 of Innocence and Evil.
The search for evidence continues in the area where the body of 20-year-old Sarah Whitehead was discovered Friday.
It was a true mystery, and you don't know what to think because they don't know what to tell you. So you're just kind of lost.
How old were you?
I was 18. At the time, my sister was 20.
Sarah Whitehead's body was discovered by her uncle the morning after she'd gone missing.
I always just tell my brother, it's sad that it happened, but at least we found her. There's families that never do find missing kids and everything.
Although North Bay police have yet to release the autopsy results, they believe Whitehead was killed early Thursday evening and that the suspect is male.
The investigative team, many of us investigated multiple major crimes over the years. She was just a beautiful, very intelligent young woman who had her whole life ahead of her.
While Paul Cook, a detective at the time, was assigned to assist, Dan Weber became one of the leads.
At about 7 o'clock in the morning, I arrived for work, and within our section, it was getting to be almost pandemonium. There had been a call received by the station that a body had been located off the roadway of Kingsway, which led from Kingsway Avenue to the Northgate Square. When you're en route to something of this nature, we have no idea at the time. We know it's a very serious call. It's the most serious call you'll ever get. But your mind's spinning. It'd be right around this general area that the road was blocked off. The road had rocks across it, and it was not a paved road. It was only pedestrian traffic.
What do you recall observing about the scene initially?
We didn't want to disturb the scene, so we as investigators, did not approach it. I then took the lead where we didn't want to disturb any of the evidence so that they had a chance to collect and properly document the physical area where Sarah had been located.
Sarah and her brother Kyle had walked the path many times before.
For anyone in the area would walk to the mall, that's how you would get there.
The murder has also shaken residents living in the subdivision adjacent to the pathway where Whitehead was murdered. It's a popular shortcut to a nearby shopping mall, but many residents say they won't be using it anymore.
We're going to the mall right now. We're taking the long way.
You're not taking the path?
No. we're all very nervous about it, and the kids have been staying in the house. They don't even want to go outside right now.
As you can see, we're in the area where the roadway was that led to Kingsway. It is now wintertime, and in August there was different types of growth in the area. What we're thinking is Sarah was probably walking with her headset on, with her Walkman on, and she was attacked from behind. As we progressed down the pathway, we didn't get all that far, and we could see exactly where Sarah had met her demise.
As investigators retrace Sarah's last steps, Martin Ransom, the unit's forensics identification specialist, arrives to analyze the crime scene.
When I first got there, I noticed that in addition to the officers that were there were members of the public milling around outside of the perimeter. And from that point, I was led into the crime scene by investigators. Traveled down the roadway a couple 100 feet, where there was an area which was described to me as the location of Sarah's body. Sarah's body was located approximately 35-40 feet off of the traveled portion of the roadway in a wooded area.
The trail itself, or the pathway, it wasn't that long, and probably within 200-300 meters you would be on the railway tracks that led to the train station / bus station, which was about half a kilometer away from the scene.
What were the facts that you had at this stage, this early stage in the investigation?
We had to get into what we call the victimology, so to speak. Is there something in her background or someone in the background that could have caused her death? And we found out that Sarah was a good person. She didn't hang around with the bad crowds. She was an honor student from high school who just recently completed her first year in Nipissing University in business, and she really was a focused young lady, somebody that her parents were very proud of.
Did you have any initial thoughts, observations about, what potentially had occurred here?
One of the odd particular things that had occurred is that Sarah had a weed wrapped around one of her legs, and the only way for that weed to be wrapped around her leg is she would have had to have been on her back and then rolled over onto her front. She was carrying a shopping bag, which we found to contain her wallet, money. It had a birthday card in it that she had purchased for her mother.
Sarah was still wearing her jewelry. Her uncle had found her Walkman nearby. This was not a robbery.
Sarah had bruising and marks on her ankle areas. She was partially clothed. She had no clothing on the lower part of her body. She did have running shoes and socks on, but no clothing.
A forensic pathologist determined Sarah had been sexually assaulted.
There was some suggestion that it most likely happened during the process of her death. So it was determined by the pathologist that she had died from manual strangulation.
Coming up, who could have done this to Sarah? Police are about to discover a key piece of evidence. That's coming up. "20-year-old Sarah Whitehead of North Bay was strangled to death. Her body found just off a trail, a popular shortcut to the local mall. But so far, police have no suspects. Here now is Caryn Lieberman with Innocence and Evil.
In a subsequent ground search, we discover Sarah's shorts hidden underneath a rock. That becomes integral to the investigation in that subsequent testing of those shorts reveals Sarah's DNA as well as an unknown male offender.
The idea that it was hidden was very intriguing to me, because that told me that there was something in those shorts that that person thought that they should be hiding. And indeed there was. It was the DNA from the assailant.
To find the killer, investigators canvassed the area in and around Northgate Mall, searching for clues.
Typically, when an investigation of such nature happens, you want to get all the short-lived evidence you possibly can, which includes video evidence, anything that can put people at a certain place at a certain time that can be lost quickly. The surveillance cameras, both inside and outside, at the time, weren't available for us.
The weekend prior to the murder was a busy one in North Bay. The annual Heritage Festival, which would bring thousands of visitors to the city.
We had this big influx. And so now you're not just looking at your own citizens, you're looking at visitors.
North Bay's a very tight community at the time. It's 52 to 54,000 people. It took the community by storm. We started receiving tips left, right, and center. The community really pulled together and provided us with tips.
Perhaps the biggest tip would come from an employee at the nearby Tourist Information Center.
One kind of piece of evidence that became really critical to the investigation was a shirt and a pair of men's GWG jeans. And they were found in the ditch. So it's somebody that's come out, observed those clothes, went over, found them to be suspicious, and made the call to the police. Our forensic ident people, photographed them as they were found, and then packaged them and secured them as exhibits for further testing down the road. So the shirt, the brand name is Fine Line. You can see it's multicolor floral print. We were able to determine that this shirt was exported to Canada, specifically Montreal, from Pakistan in the 1970s. The jeans were GWG, 32-inch waist, and they were 34-inch inseam, but they were folded up and hemmed at 27.5 inches. So this was invaluable to us in that it provided the stature of our suspect.
We could say, okay, it's not a larger individual, it's actually somebody with a smaller stature. We had no idea what the significance of the clothing would be until October, when we actually sent the clothing away for DNA analysis.
The shorts that were retained from hidden under a rock at the scene, and the jeans that were retained a little bit better than a kilometer away, both had an unknown male DNA profile, which was the same DNA profile.
What did you make of that?
We're always dealing with linkages, and this definitely gave us a linkage of that clothing was most likely worn by the person who had assaulted Sarah Whitehead.
A portrait of a potential suspect begins to emerge as Sarah Whitehead's family struggles to cope with the loss.
I just remember the church being, full, standing room only, people outside, and procession from the church up to the gravesite.
The victim was a recent graduate of this North Bay high school. Principal Peter Boire remembers Sarah Whitehead as a quiet girl and a good student.
A very, hardy participant. She was a member of the band. She played the flute in the band. She was an honors student, and she had a wonderful circle of friends.
Meantime, as tips rolled in, the North Bay Police Department left no stone unturned in searching for Sarah's killer.
Early on, we identified a suspect, and it was a result of a tip about suspicious activity in the area of Kingsway Avenue, which is the street that links the pathway to the mall. It was a male that was known to police. We subsequently interviewed him. He had some weak denials, like I wouldn't do that, I couldn't do that, as opposed to I didn't do it. You've got the wrong guy.
We actually had an undercover operator befriend him, and he had actually confessed or told the undercover operator that he had been in that area that day. So to eliminate the individual, we took DNA from him, which eventually came back and exonerated him.
Dan Weber kept the Whitehead family updated on developments.
There was oftentimes we had nothing to tell them, but we would also tell them where we were in the investigation.
But still, no arrest.
It was like every day having to go to work and looking for a needle in a haystack, and every day there was a new haystack.
One tip was particularly interesting to investigators.
A male known to frequent Northgate Square has a history of inappropriate behavior towards young females, inappropriate comments, some stalking behaviors.
He had had a fight with his girlfriend and she kicked him out. On the 7th of August, roughly the same time Sarah was going to be at the mall, he was at the mall and he was visiting his bank. He also utilized the pharmacy there, and that he dyed his hair on the 8th of August, which was something that was not uncommon from apparently, but we developed him as a strong suspect.
With a 32-inch waist and 27-inch inseam, he fit the physical description of the suspect wanted for Sarah's murder. But he refused to provide a DNA sample.
On the 11th of October, he is arrested for a totally unrelated offense. And the uniformed officer that's involved with him has the presence of mind to seize a cigarette butt that he discards. And we send that away to the Center of Forensic Science.
It was a match.
He is arrested and charged for first-degree murder in relation to Sarah.
It was the best lead I guess they had at the time. It did give us a feeling that they were really on the right path.
In the back of the investigators' minds, it's like, you know, we're onto something here, it looks good, this could be over shortly.
I received the phone call, and it was that time I had found out that the person we had charged in the homicide, his DNA went to 0. So it wasn't our suspect.
Everybody at that point is so confident we have the right guy, and we're also struggling with how we have an initial DNA match and then we ask for a second set of tests and that doesn't match anymore. But you know, the scientists explained to us that 100% you have the wrong guy.
This was the late 90s. While DNA was already being used in forensic investigations in Canada, Martin Ransom recalls the technology was still developing.
During the process of having this DNA analyzed, there was new processes that came along and allowed DNA to be analyzed to a greater certainty. So it gave a greater number of people in the population that would be exclusive to that DNA. We utilized that technology, and as a result, there was a suspect that was eliminated as being a suspect, even though initially his DNA did match in several locations.
The news was shared with Sarah's family.
That was a tough day for us, because where you think that it's over and there could be some closure, where it's not the case.
It was, we were back to square one.
Coming up, an unexpected call to police leads them to a string of sexual assaults. Police have a male DNA sample recovered off the shorts of Sarah Whitehead. But it's the 1990s, and DNA profiling is still in its infancy. So far, they don't have a match. Here's Caryn Lieberman with Innocence and Evil.
More than 300 interviews have already been conducted, and police are continuing to appeal to the public.
We're asking the public to come forward and tell us what they may have seen or heard. Our investigators want to be the ones to determine whether it's significant or not, and we're asking the public to leave that decision up to our people.
There was 768 persons of interest that were identified and eventually eliminated. We had 115 persons that were possible persons of interest where we didn't have a first name or a last name. We had 613 witness interviews and took 789 statements. The total exhibit seized was 775, so there was no let up in this investigation.
Years passed since the unsolved murder of Sarah Whitehead, but the case never went cold. The most important pieces of evidence: a pair of men's jeans and a paisley print shirt.
You know, unequivocally, we could say whoever was wearing these clothes was the person responsible for murdering Sarah Whitehead.
We had sent a copy of our poster that we drafted up to every police agency, every correctional facility, every social service agency, penitentiary in Canada.
Then finally one day you get a call.
We had received a call from Constable Chris Brown of the OPP. Chris was assigned to the Sturgeon Falls detachment. Sturgeon Falls is located to the west of us, maybe 20-some kilometers away. And Chris had investigated the theft of a bicycle back in, I believe it was July of '97. And the call he received was from a penitentiary in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan.
They advised him that the OPP have a warrant for Paul Hashi for theft under $5,000 from the summer of 1997. And they indicate you might want to purge that warrant. We just brought him to Prince Albert. He's doing 19 years for a sexual assault in the city of Calgary in December of 1997.
It drew red flags for him. He couldn't comprehend a 19-year sentence for a sexual assault. That's on the high end. There must be something there. There must have been something that was an aggravating circumstance.
It was one of the worst attacks city police have ever seen, and it came just 2 weeks before Christmas. Police were called to this apartment building where they found a woman unconscious in the basement laundry room. She had been sexually assaulted and left for dead.
I didn't recognize my daughter when I went to her hospital bed. Until I looked for birthmarks, I didn't even know it was her.
Paul Allen Hashi had followed her into her apartment building, taken her down to the basement, and viciously beat her and sexually assaulted her. Paul Hashi was arrested right outside in the laneway outside of her residence.
The attack was so severe it left the 21-year-old victim in a coma for nearly a month, and for a while doctors didn't even think she'd survive. Although she's better now, it's likely she'll never fully recover.
The doctors had told my parents that I only had 3 more minutes to live by the time I was at the hospital. I do not want to see any other woman go through this pain, horror that I had to go through.
Because of our poster campaign and the ongoing communications we had with police services throughout Canada, especially those neighboring police services, everybody was very familiar with the Whitehead homicide.
It's now March 1999, around a year and a half since Sarah's murder, when OPP Constable Chris Brown calls the North Bay Police Service to relay the information.
Chris says, wow, you know, this is a really violent sex offender that was living in our area in July of 1997. That was the hottest tip that we had received in months.
Until that day, Paul Allen Hashi's name had never come up in the investigation. Who is this man? What was he doing in North Bay?
We're able to determine that Hashi had been living with his sister and brother-in-law in Verner, just outside Sturgeon Falls, that he eventually gets kicked out of the house because of behavior. He ends up signing himself into a treatment center here in North Bay.
And on the morning of August 7th, 1997, he takes a taxi to the bus station near Northgate Square.
This is the bus train station. You can see the tracks that run kind of between the train station and Northgate Square. We had a taxi voucher receipt. Because the detox center paid for that trip, he had to sign for it. And Marty Ransom, our forensic identification officer, is able to lift an identifiable print from that taxi voucher and identify it to be Hashi's print.
Investigators take a drive to Hashi's sister's home in nearby Sturgeon Falls. They show her a photo of the men's jeans and paisley print shirt.
The sister immediately starts crying. She used to do his laundry. That was his favorite shirt.
A call to Calgary police, where Hashi was first charged, and cigarette butts discarded at the scene of the sexual assault by Hashi are sent to the Center of Forensic Science for DNA analysis.
We had a conclusive match that was in the billions of a match.
And so what does that mean?
When we get matches that are in the billions and they exceed the number in the population of the world, that it is beyond a doubt an exact match.
So we had the killer.
We had the killer at that point. We now knew who wore those clothes. We knew who was in the grassy area behind the Northgate Square with Sarah Whitehead, and we knew that conclusively from the DNA.
So we know now that Paul Allen Hashey is responsible for the sexual assault murder of Sarah Whitehead.
On May the 1st, 1999, Tim Nesbitt and myself flew out to Saskatchewan. We arrested Hashey for the murder of Sarah Whitehead, and he was brought back to North Bay.
Coming up, Paul Allen Hashey reveals to investigators what he did to Sarah, along with a bombshell revelation. That's after the break. In late April of 1999, Paul Allen Hashey is charged with the first-degree murder of Sarah Whitehead. He's already serving time for a brutal sexual assault in Calgary. On May 1st, Hashey is brought to North Bay, Ontario, and the details of what he did to Sarah are about to emerge. Here once again is Caryn Lieberman with Innocence and Evil.
Certainly, Hashey is by far and away one of the most violent individuals I've ever dealt with in my career. He's short in stature, 165 pounds of solid muscle. For somebody of that stature, is very intimidating to see. The investigation revealed that he had taken the taxi to the bus train station. His intention was to take a bus to Ottawa, and so he wandered, through the pathway behind Northgate in that wooded area, for all intents and purposes, waiting for his bus to leave.
He did admit to us that he had gone to the beer store and had, which was adjacent, it's not too far away from where the crime scene was, had been out in that area, and he admitted killing her.
Sarah was really big into exercise, and she often walked with a Walkman. And that's what happened. This wasn't late at night. This was before 8 p.m., in August. So it's still basically daylight hours. And, she walks by him on this pathway, and he grabs her off the path and drags her into the wooded area and sexually assaults and murders her. It was just, obviously one of the most tragic cases this police service has ever seen in our history.
All indicators would be that she was heading back out to that path because she thought that that would be at least a spot that someone might see her, where she might be able to get some distance on her assailant.
Analysis of physical evidence at the crime scene suggested she didn't go without a fight.
And when I look at what I see at the scene, I see exactly that she was fighting off her assailant.
Sarah fought her attacker and tried to get home.
I truly believe that Sarah may have even escaped her assailant for a short period of time and was trying to get back to the roadway. The fact that she had bruises on her ankles would be consistent with somebody grabbing at her ankles.
What we figure is after he sexually assaults Sarah, he cleans himself off using her shorts, hides the shorts under a rock, makes his way back to the bus train station, gets changed, walks a short distance to the bypass, dumps the clothes in the ditch, and that's where he's subsequently picked up hitchhiking and travels up to Highway 17 to Ottawa.
25 years since Sarah's murder, Dan Weber has returned to the scene.
What happened was, when he went to this organization in Ottawa, a charitable organization, he was seeking a bus ticket to go west. The bus ticket took him as far as North Bay for a stop, and make its way eventually out to Regina in a couple days. And Hashey The following day would have been at that bus station waiting for the bus to pick up people to continue on westward, while the rest of us would have been out here pounding the pavement and doing canvassing and dealing with the crime scene. He never did say why he targeted her. So in my mind, she was just a person of opportunity for him.
This was one of those whodunit homicides where there's no relationship between the victim and the suspect. And it was just a real tragedy in that Sarah just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Even before Hashi's arrest, the Whitehead family was advised there'd been a break in the case.
Yeah, they finally had him, and they were, from my understanding, DNA, it was 100%. There was no questions about it. So that was a big relief, and that was nearly 3 years after the fact. And I remember my parents saying, finally, this is over. Like, we can move on.
It was during Hashi's return flight to North Bay, with investigators at his side, that he made several shocking revelations.
And it's on that return flight home that he gives them some preliminary indication that he's responsible for some fairly significant unsolved crimes in Ontario and in Alberta.
It was weird that somebody would open up like that and start talking about those type of occurrences. You don't see that every day. You don't hear about that every day. I don't know what was in his mind, why he would confess to some of these horrific, they were all horrific crimes. I don't understand why he would do that. Maybe it's because he got a 19-year sentence out in Calgary, and he figured that life is 25 and then you're out.
These were significant sexual assaults. They were terrible, terrible, terrible sexual assaults in Edmonton.
The one instance where he had taken a young female to a field, actually, we found out later that she was a 14-year-old girl who was delivering newspapers, and had dragged her into a field and had raped her. That had gone unsolved. That was a 1988 case. He had admitted to another incident where he entered into a woman's residence, and she had been sleeping on the couch along with her child on another couch, and he told her to keep quiet, and he raped her right there. So there was another incident in Edmonton where he actually had a hotel room, and he lured a young lady into the hotel room, and he choked her, forcibly confined her, and raped her as well.
Disturbing details of horrific crimes.
I couldn't believe that some of the things that were actually coming from him, some of the details that I'd find out later about some of the incidences he was involved in. He talked about it, but he didn't show really any emotion. He didn't break down and cry and ask for forgiveness. He just basically said the way it was.
Hashi said even more, a bombshell revelation.
I don't know what was in his mind, but he told us that you tell your bosses this is about another homicide.
Coming up, that other murder victim revealed. North Bay police have arrested and charged Paul Allen Hashi with the first-degree murder of Sarah Whitehead. Now, Hashi says there's another homicide he wants to tell them about. Here's Caryn Lieberman with a conclusion of innocence and evil.
Hashi brought up other cases that he said that indicated he was involved in. One included an incident that happened in Toronto back in 1994 where he had befriended an individual, took him to a secluded place where his intention was to rob him, and I think there was a sexual connotation in there he put in as well, and he ended up murdering this individual.
Paul Allen Hashi gave Dan Weber details of an unsolved murder that never made headlines in North Bay.
We contacted Toronto Homicide, and so we just said, this is what we have, this is what the individual is telling us.
One day a call comes in, I'll never forget it. I was sitting at 42 Division in Scarborough, and I got a call from the North Bay Police Service. And I remember a detective asking me, are you the one in charge of the Larry Arnold case in Toronto? And I said, yes, I am. And he said, well, I have good news for you. We've arrested a man here in North Bay, and we've charged him for the murder and sexual assault of a young woman up here in North Bay, and several other violent attacks on women. And when he was confessing to all of those crimes, he decided that he would clear the slate, and he said, I also murdered a man in Toronto in 1994. And the detective told me, I believe it's Larry Arnold.
Dave Perry had long left the homicide unit by that point. This was his only case that remained unsolved.
This was the Hail Mary of Hail Marys to have that call from North Bay, and I just remember sitting up straight and going, oh my God, we finally got a break on this case. And we suited up and we went up to North Bay to have a chat with their suspect to see if in fact it was the killer of Larry Arnold.
Perry vividly recalls meeting Hashi.
And I took one look at him, and it looked like pure evil had walked through the door. In all my years, I've sat across from murderers and rapists and you name it, the most violent people that this society can throw at you. And it's the only time in my entire career where I looked at this guy and in just a nanosecond, I thought, if he goes crazy, we're going to need help.
What did he look like?
He had shoulders this wide. He had a V-shaped body down to a 28-inch waist and sledgehammers for fists that I recognized were from a high degree of martial arts training. He would make Charles Manson look like a Boy Scout.
And you've been briefed at this point about his crimes.
We've been briefed. We know the violence, the level of violence. We told him we were in charge of the homicide case involving Mr. Larry Arnold from 1994. He said, yeah, that was me.
Perry and his partner questioned Hashi to make sure he wasn't lying.
Maybe you just want to be the next Paul Bernardo. You want to have the reputation when you go to jail for the rest of your life is being the serial killer. And so I think you're going to have to prove it to me, right? So he said to me, what did you find at autopsy? So I said to him, that would be a great question for you to answer. He said, well, you should have found that he had a shattered jaw, because I took him out in the ravine under the guise that we were going to have sex, and all I wanted to do was rob him. And he said, so I hit him, and he went down, but what surprised me is he got back up. And so I stomped him again, and I crushed his skull. So I asked him, quite frankly, how do you know you crushed his skull? And he said, I'm a 7th Dan black belt in karate, and I break bricks with my heels.
An autopsy had revealed Larry Arnold suffered a broken jaw and shattered skull, but those details were never made public.
So at that point, I'm fairly convinced that we have the right person. He's told me things that nobody else knew, except for my partner Chris and I, and he came out with the items that we knew were missing.
No one else knew that?
Nobody else knew that. He said, well, I stole his brown leather jacket with big buttons on it, and he described a very unique ring that Larry was wearing, and he stole that, and he stole his wallet and credit cards. And of course, those were the exact items that we identified were missing. I stood up and I walked over to him and I reached out to shake his hand, and he looked at me like I was crazy, but I said, listen, Paul, this case has been sitting on our desk for a long time. There's a family out there that's waiting for some answers. So I just want to tell you I appreciate what you did today, and I'll be able to call the family as soon as we leave here and tell them that we've got the person responsible for their murder of their loved one.
So when we went down to Toronto, our goal was to bring Hashi down there, let Hashi direct us to wherever it is that he's indicated that he had the encounter with Larry.
6 years later, walked us to the exact little patch of woods. He took us inside there and showed us exactly where the body was.
Hashi filled in some of the blanks about what happened the day Larry was murdered.
It was a by-chance meeting, and Larry was a very generous person. He wasn't really a drinker, but he would buy friends or acquaintances, he'd buy them a drink. A very kind, very soft-spoken, very generous individual. And this animal just took full advantage of that.
Why do you think he finally confessed to it?
He knew he was going to jail for the rest of his natural life. I don't know. Maybe there's just that small piece of him that thought, well, I might as well just get this all off my record, right? There's not a good thing I could say about Paul Hatchie. He's pure evil, as I said, personified. He's just everybody's worst nightmare.
In Toronto, Hatchie also pointed out locations where he said he had previously assaulted and robbed people.
It didn't matter if it was money, property, sex, whatever he wanted, he got it through, you know, very high levels of violence, and unfortunately was a guy that was trained to do it. Larry was a fighter, and Larry was not going to be the victim of crime without putting up a fight, and he did.
Joshua Hind recalls learning more about the man responsible for his beloved Uncle Larry's murder.
I realized that not only was my uncle murdered, but my uncle was murdered by maybe one of Canada's least known serial killers, certainly serial offenders.
In February 2000, Paul Allen Hatchie pleaded guilty to the first-degree murder of Sarah Whitehead and was sentenced to life in prison, no chance of parole, for 25 years. Hatchie subsequently pleaded guilty to the second-degree murder of Larry Arnold in July 2001 and 3 more sexual assaults in Edmonton and Calgary.
Looking back at the Whitehead homicide, in a long investigation such as this, you learn so much. You learn that that next positive tip could be just around the corner. Never give up.
And that magical tip came in the form of a phone call from a young police officer in the OPP who is very humble, and to this day will tell you he was just doing his job. But again, if it wasn't for him reaching out, Paul Allen Hatchie's name never surfaces, or might never have surfaced, as a suspect on this homicide.
I wish I could have seen what she could have done, right? You know, I'm sure she would have been a great wife, a great mother. You know, me and my wife aren't aunts and uncles because of that. I think she would have been a great person, and unfortunately we'll never know, right?
And my brother started a scholarship fund up at the college where Sarah went. Every year, a couple or 3 kids that are in that course help get money to help with their schooling. You know, there's kids that still get help from Sarah even though she's not with us.
What do you think Uncle Larry's legacy is?
I think people should know more about a person like Paul Allen Hatchie, not because of who he was, but because of how long he was able to go and do it, to do the terrible things that he was able to do. And that's not to besmirch the work of the police who eventually caught him or the people who kept after him for years, but he was able to operate for a long time. And that's a common thread in stories about serial killers in this country. So if telling Larry's story, as much as maybe he would rather I didn't if he were here to talk to me today, I think it's important to do, and I would like that to be part of his legacy. And then on a nicer note, I think I am part of his legacy. Like there's a direct line between that cassette tape of Phantom of the Opera and me today running the production department at one of Canada's oldest theater companies. Not everybody has the privilege of being able to draw such a straight and perfect line between a moment like that and where they are today. And I can do that, and a lot of that is because of him.
Designated a dangerous offender, Paul Allen Hatchie has been serving an indeterminate sentence since August 1998. He will remain locked up until the Parole Board of Canada decides his risk has decreased enough to be safely released into the community on conditions. His day parole eligibility date was May 1st, 2021. The eligibility date for full parole, May 1st, 2024. While it took years to find her killer, Sarah Whitehead's family is grateful to the North Bay Police Service for never giving up. Investigators in both the Sarah Whitehead and Larry Arnold homicides say the support of the community was integral in their pursuit of justice. I'm Anthony Robart. Thank you for joining us tonight on Crime Beat. Want more episodes of Crime Beat? Listen to the Crime Beat podcast now for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you find your favorite podcast. And for past episodes of Crime Beat, check out our YouTube page, globaltv.com, or download the Global Go app.